Hello all, this is Pastor Gary with I want to do a quick video on the difference between parallelism and chiastic structure and why it's important to know. To illustrate the difference between parallelism and chiastic structure, both of which appear in Jewish thought, I'm going to use passages from Ecclesiastes 3 because I think they're some of the clearest. But what you need to understand is that parallelism was a thought structure that has been around for literally millennia. For at least 5,000 years we can trace this as a form of thought in various cultures around the globe. But chiastic structure, or chiasmus, which will come next, was unique to Jewish way of thinking and looking at things, and it plays an important part in understanding Scripture. So, here we go. Parallelism is presenting two ideas, unique but similar, and using that to gain insight into both. So for instance, I'm going to use this passage of Ecclesiastes 3. Think of it as train tracks running inside. This is to that as this is to that. So this passage from Ecclesiastes 3 goes like this. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot. And you can see this is to that as this is to that. A time to be born, a time to die. A time to plant, a time to uproot. And it's using these things, born, die, plant, uproot, as parallel thought structures, each one trying to give an insight into the other. In other words, planting and uprooting is kind of like being born and dying. And in fact, and you can look at it the other way and say being born and dying is like being planted in life. You have all this potential around you, your soil that you nurture, you're being planted. And at the end of your life, when it's over and it's done and you fall asleep or pass away, uprooted, no longer to have that kind of impact and shelter or shade or nourish those around you as well. So that's parallelism, right? Next, chiasmus. All right, chiasmus is a unique Jewish twist on the notion of parallelism. And I'm going to use another passage from Ecclesiastes 3 because Hebrews were fond of mixing the two. Parallelism, again, was what was traditional form structures that were used against many cultures, but chiasmus was a unique Hebraic poetic invention. And it works a little like this. If we can go back to our train tracks, it's a little more like this is to that as that is to this. Or A is to B as B is to A. And this passage I'm going to use will illustrate this pretty well. So you have a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, a time for peace. Or let me do it this way so you can see it. So a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. Love, hate, war, peace. And chiasmus structure is analyzed is often done like that. It works in an idea and it works out. And what's important to understand is that the center part, not the outside layers of the onion, so to speak, you peel away the onion to get to the center, is where the most important part. That's the heart. So in this passage from Ecclesiastes that I just read, what Solomon was trying to get us to understand was a time to love and a time for peace, that's important to know. But it's really important to understand when it's a time to hate and a time for war. And whether you're thinking, well, I don't think there's ever a time to hate or a time for war or a time to kill. Think about when it's a time to decide to kill the cancer, when it's a time to decide to kill the bad ideas, when it's a time to decide to kill the bad habits, when it's a time to stop letting good be run over, when is it a time to hate that which is evil. Right? And that's actually what he's saying. Solomon is saying think very carefully about making this. It's a very important decision whether to go to war, when to pick up arms. That you make the right choice. That's the most important thing you want to think about. Love and peace? Absolutely. Hate and war? Think very carefully before you step onto that ground. And that's kind of what is important. In fact, chiastic structure is so important to the Jews that they organized many books around this. The Gospel of John is a large chiastic structure with John 8:58, the I am that I am, at the center. Leviticus is another book that's written that way. And at the heart of all of this chiastic structure coming in is Leviticus 16, which is the Day of Atonement. Daniel chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all chiastic structure. And you can see Daniel 2 matches Daniel 7, and Daniel 3 matches Daniel 6, and Daniel 4 matches Daniel 5. And at the center of that 4 and 5 is the important part of the verse, or this chapter in the story, that you choose your life and your destiny. It is in your hands. God gives you the choice. He is working to set kings up and take kings down. And you will face persecution, and He can deliver. But the choice is yours, where you will stand and how you will be measured. And that's part of it. It shows up in the Beatitudes. Right? At the beginning you have Kingdom of Heaven. At the end you have Kingdom of Heaven. And the most important part there is in the center. It also shows up in the book of Revelation, of course. And it's clear in the book of Revelation chapter 12, when you have such repeating ideas, where the woman goes into the wilderness for 1,260 days, and then there's a war in heaven, and then the woman goes into the wilderness for 1,260 days. And so you see this, it's at the heart of that Revelation 12, which is the center of the whole structure, is actually the point that the most important part is to catch that there was a war in heaven, and all the things that fall out from this has been disastrous, but that God is triumphant, and that God is winning that war, and has won the war, and the battles are simply finishing up. So it's important to understand chiastic structure, because when you find something in chiastic structure, pay attention to what's the center. That's the point. Alright, hopefully that was a quick tutorial to make the difference in understanding between parallelism and chiastic structure. See you!